excited to be here with you all and just welcome you all to our I guess inaugural class and CBT practicum. This one focused more on children and adolescents, and we have a really amazing partnership that we've developed between Columbia Teachers College and your awesome PhD program and the Child Family Institute and the Weissman Children's Foundation. And it's a very unique situation that you don't really find in typical academic environments. But we're all very progressive here, and we've decided to kind of come together and bring our resources from CFI and WCF to Columbia Teachers College and create this CBT program and practicum for you guys using resources from our program and some of our connections in the world of cognitive behavioral therapy, and including some of the leaders in the field. So this is a really neat opportunity for us, for our new nonprofit foundation, the Weissman Children's Foundation, and also I think for Columbia and for the students to be able to kind of join forces in this way. And we're hoping it's going to be a big success, and we're open to kind of feedback from all of you along the way about your experience, because this is a very unique model that we're developing, this partnership. And so if it goes well, this could be potentially the first of many future partnerships between academic institutions and nonprofit organizations with this kind of mission of dissemination of best practices and evidence-based treatments for underserved populations. And so I've already talked to the program about potentially writing grants together in the future, or modeling this type of partnership and curriculum development out again for doing this with other institutions in the future. But this is going to be the test run, the pilot run, and we're so excited. And I guess I'll just share very briefly about the Weissman Children's Foundation, so you understand, like, there might be some other kind of trainees once in a while coming on and shadowing our classes to just kind of see what we're doing. But the Weissman Children's Foundation is something that we're just starting, and we started it before COVID, like in January, but the idea is to basically, the problems in our country there's a lot of problems in our country right now. But
Many things.
Oh man. But the mental health, the mounting mental health crisis is a big one. And I think now, especially amid the twin pandemics of COVID and racial tension and civil unrest, I think the mental health sequelae, the mental health crisis, has really kind of almost been the forgotten crisis with everything going on. And obviously, this was an issue well before COVID, and now there's just been a surge in rates of all kinds of mental health issues and emotional and behavioral sequelae of just being isolated for so long, and parents having so much stress and challenges of working from home and managing, school for their kids, whether it's homeschooling or hybrid models or whatever is going on these days, and increased rates of domestic violence and trauma and suicidal, ideation and behavior. So a lot of things, addiction. So there's just a lot happening. There's a lot happening before that wasn't being tended to, and there's a lot happening since the onset of COVID. And so we are really focused on trying to find a way to help on a more systemic national level. And up until now, the federal government hasn't done very much in the way of mental health support. This is even before the current administration. There just hasn't been a lot of enough attention to the mental health crisis as far as making accessible, affordable, and gold standard best practices, evidence-based treatments for children as well as for adults. And the insurance companies have not made this a possibility either. They have not made this accessible to the average person, to underserved communities particularly, right? If you have $300 or $400 an hour, you can go to a private practice. You can say, I want, my kid has selective mutism, and if you guys don't know what that is yet, that's fine. But I want cognitive behavioral therapy for selective mutism, which is a very specialized treatment that works really well for kids who are able to speak but don't speak at school or don't speak in public, right? It's a severe anxiety disorder. And it's actually more common than people realize. But I need that specific treatment. Where am I going to get it? I have to be wealthy in order to get that treatment. I can't get it in network. And anyone who is in a network panel, um, the panels don't pay very much to providers like us. You guys are training. You guys are going to be doing this for a long time. This is a long road you guys are on. And when you're done, you may choose to take insurance out of the goodness of your heart, but you also may say, listen, I've trained for 10 years. I don't want to get paid $70 an hour. I want to actually like do something where I can support my family in a really positive way. And so the insurance companies have not made this easy for folks. And so to get that service, you would not be able to go in network and get that service, for example, or some of the services that Michelle provides. She does some very specialized services for biofeedback and virtual reality enhanced cognitive behavioral therapy and other therapies. And she also is a health psychologist specializing in chronic medical conditions and psychological sequelae of those. And to find someone really good who does all those things also, probably going to have to go to private practice and pay, again, $40 an hour. So this is a huge problem. The insurance companies haven't dealt with it. The federal government certainly hasn't dealt with it in any kind of systemic way. And so the Weissman Children's Foundation is trying to deal with this, address this systemically through a private nonprofit foundation, where we're going to essentially try to, uh, pardon my grandiosity, but revolutionize the mental health landscape in this country by breaking down barriers and creating access to evidence-based treatments, high quality mental and behavioral health care, um, in underserved communities with a focus on, BIPOC populations and low income individuals. And so this is something that we're trying to do, and we have a lot of different types of partnerships, and one of them is with Columbia University in this way. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on what this is all about, as you'll see many different presenters over the course of the year, both friends and colleagues, and also many of our directors at the Family Institute and the Weissman Children's Foundation. So you'll get a breadth of expertise and a breadth of different topics and presenters across the realm of CBT. And you'll see there's some foundational aspects of CBT. There's also some very specialized treatments, kind of like some of the ones I just mentioned. So I wanted to give you guys a little bit of that background. But what I like to do before we turn it over to Michelle to start talking about case conceptualization and some of the things we're going to be talking about this year, I'd love to just go around and get to know each of you a little bit first. And maybe I was thinking maybe everybody could just kind of introduce themselves, say a few words about, I know you guys did a great job, by the way, with the email chain. That was really cool to kind of like hear you guys kind of write a little bit about like what exposure you had so far to CBT, and like, what year are you, and just like some generic background details. But I'd love to do that again here. So if you don't already know each other, you probably do, get to know one another, but also get to know us, and we can get to know you. So maybe we can do a similar format as what you did in the email, but maybe add a couple extra things if you'd like about, interests or, future goals, stuff like that. So I might just take us around the boxes and go in some sort of order here. So I think I'll start with my second row, which is Elizabeth. Hi, Elizabeth. Would you be willing to go first? And then I'll just kind of go box by box down the line.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm a second year in the clinical psychology program. This is pretty much my first exposure to CBT beyond currently taking Dr. Vidali's CBT IPT course. So thankfully we'll be doing some readings alongside this, which will be nice. I love working with kids. I've sort of always worked with kids in some capacity in camps or childcare, that type of thing. Obviously not in therapy yet. As a second year, this is my first year getting like longer term clients rather than just an assessment case or an intake. So I'm looking forward to it. And I am geographically still in New York City, so I am here and just doing Zoom University.
Awesome. It's nice to meet you, Elizabeth. Thanks for thanks for being here with us today. Um, and I think we'll go next to Alana. Alana, would you like to introduce yourself and say a few words about you?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Ilana Gratch. I'm also a second year, also in Dr. Verdelli's CBT class now. I think that's my first real like formal exposure to CBT beyond curiosity and independent exploring. I mentioned in the email that before starting the program here, I worked for 2 years in the psych ER at Columbia, delivering like a CBT-esque informed brief intervention for suicidal patients. So that's a bit of exposure. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to working with you all and with children and adolescents. And yeah, it's nice to meet everyone.
Nice to meet you, Alana. Thank you. And I see Catherine's next. Hi, Catherine. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. Not to keep repeating, but I'm also a second year in the class with Alana and Elizabeth. Um, I have had previous exposure to working with children, not as much with CBT, but the first year I lived in New York, I did a AmeriCorps year of service, which involved teaching adolescents. And I worked within the special education department, so I've gotten some exposure to adolescents with ADHD and special needs. And then I worked at Montefiore for a year doing psychoeducational remediation, which also incorporated some behavioral modification techniques as well as mindfulness techniques, but again, like sprinkled in here and there and not a full-fledged CBT program. But I'm really excited. I love working with kids and incorporating their parents into treatment programs as well. And yeah, I can't wait for this practicum to begin.
All right. Thank you, Catherine. Hi, Abigail. How are you?
Hi, good, thanks. I'll break the chain. I'm a third year student in the program. Prior to this, I've had experience working with kids mostly like Elizabeth in terms of a lot of babysitting and nannying gigs. I've also, a few years ago, spent some time at a school for children with autism and more on the like lower functioning end of the spectrum, training in applied behavior analysis. No formal certification, but like hands-on training there. And then at the Dean Hope Center, done IPT, interpersonal therapy that's manualized, and have taken Dr. Verdelli's course, but I haven't done any CBT myself.
Great. Thank you. Got some unique experiences there so far. That's wonderful. So I'm gonna go to Daisy and Anika next, and then I'll come back, and Lauren and Emily, you guys can say hi too. How about that? Oh, and then I'll come back up to Christina, because Christina's with us too. And then I'll introduce Michelle. All right. So Daisy, how are you? Nice
Hey, good morning. Nice to meet you. Hey, everyone. So I'm also a third year in the program. Clinically, I've been trained in dynamic and family therapy, so I had some experience working with a child as part of a family therapy model. And then before that, I worked in forensics for a few years, but before that, like during undergrad, I worked with kids and I absolutely loved it. So that was like a big motivation to take a child practicum this year. You mentioned selective mutism, so I volunteered for Dr. Stephen Kurtz at the Child Mind Institute in the selective mutism intervention program. I don't remember any of the interventions, so I'm excited to relearn CBT, but it worked and it was fascinating. And so I also worked with kids who had behavioral issues or disruptive disorders in elementary schools who are in mainstream settings. And again, no formal CBT training, although I think I drew on a lot of those intervention models like token economies and things. And again, excited to learn formally what to do and taking this side by side with CBT for adults. So hopefully I'll start learning how to do CBT. So
Yeah, you might pick it up quickly with all that foundation. And actually, the person who's going to be leading our selective mutism seminar is Dr. Amy Kachba, and she wrote one of the main manuals on the treatment, one of the main books, and so she's like a leader in the field and a treatment developer. She also is our consultant at CFI and WCF, and she runs our selective mutism training program. So it's going to be a real treat to have her to learn from her, and then I'll be presenting on behavioral issues, behavioral parent training, kind of at the end of the year. So we'll be talking more about that and going through some of the most evidence-based practices and approaches for helping parents support kids with behavioral issues. But really, it's going to be a lot more than that because these approaches work well for parents to help support their kids with anxiety, with to some extent with trauma, to some extent with ADHD related behaviors. So, those parent support approaches can be really, really impactful for a wide range of childhood behaviors. So we'll be talking about some of that as well. But you'll have a real treat with Amy, and then we'll come back and talk about some of the behavioral stuff as well. So thank you for sharing that experience, Daisy. And then finally, Anika for our Columbia students.
Hi, I'm Annika. I'm a third year clinical
Annika.
student, and that's fine, in the doc program. And I love babies and children. I have a lot of experience caring for young infants. So I used to work in a daycare with newborn through 4 months. And then in my master's program, I had the opportunity to work at the Motherhood Center, which is a partial hospitalization program for women with perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. And I did infant care there, which was awesome, and got some exposure to dyadic psychotherapy. And I'm really excited to finally be learning a bit about child therapy. As far as CBT goes, I had the opportunity to TA for Dr. Verdelli's master's level CBT course, so followed along with some of the readings and research from the academic side of things. And then I'm currently an informal extern at the New York State Psychiatric Institute, where we're being trained to implement a manualized form of CBT for suicidal depressed individuals. That's all virtual right now, which is awesome. I've received 3 months supervision in that, but we haven't recruited patients, so haven't actually seen a patient in CBT yet, but I feel like I'm getting some more foundation through that experience at least. So yeah, that's my background.
That's excellent. Thank you for sharing that background. It sounds like you have a great foundation as well. Annika, nice to meet you. And yeah, I think that's it for the Columbia students. Especially, were there supposed to be 7 students in the class, or because I see 6 here, was there a 7th student as well?
Chen, I don't believe is taking it anymore.
I think
Okay.
who were going to take it and then ended up taking a different practicum.
Gotcha. So this is it.
This is everyone.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
I love it. Nice intimate group. This is really nice. Just wanted to make sure. Okay, so then so Lauren and Emily, would you guys like to say a quick hello? Lauren and Emily, I'll just mention briefly, work at CFI and WCF with us, and they help out with just about everything that we do. And they'll be shadowing the classes as well and helping with any technical difficulties, but also just kind of learning alongside you guys. So do you want to introduce yourselves briefly and say hi?
Sure, yeah. Hi, everyone. My name's Emily. I'm an intake coordinator at the Child and Family Institute. And through that experience, I've also been able to co-lead and shadow various CBT and DBT groups for ages around 10, and now a young adult with adults on the spectrum. So very exciting, but all of my experience thus far has been hands-on. So really looking forward to learning with all of you and helping more so behind the scenes.
Thanks, Emily, for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. This is great. Very excited to be here.
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Lauren. I'm actually working with Ph.D. right now to figure out some technical issues. So I haven't really been able to pay attention, which I'm really sad about. And I hope I can watch the recording later to get to know all of you. But I'm also an intake coordinator. I've been able to co-lead some group therapy sessions with CFI. That's been really cool. Really exciting to listening in on this class.
Thanks, Lauren. Awesome. Really excited you guys are here. And so let's go to Christina Athenius, who is, well, I'll let you introduce yourself, but Christina, I'll just mention briefly that Christina was an extern with us a few years ago, and she was so awesome. We had to bring her back as a postdoc this year. So, Christina, I'm excited to see you, and excited for your postdoc year. And want to say a quick hello?
Yeah, hi everyone. So Adam said the most important part is that basically I was at CFI as an extern and I loved it. So once I graduated, I was like, I gotta go back, and immediately reached out to them so that I could continue on and do a postdoc with them. You guys are super lucky to have them doing your supervision and stuff because they drew me back a year later. So it's going to be an awesome year.
Well, we're so excited to have you back, and so excited to have you, kind of shadowing this course. And actually, I believe you will be potentially co-leading. Now, Dr. Athenios, you will be co-leading one of the lectures as well. Is that right?
Yes, I'll be helping out with the CBT for LGBTQ related issues.
All right. So that'd be a real treat. Christina's amazing. So very cool. And I'm sure if you guys have questions about postdocs and stuff like that along the way, she'd be a really great resource for all of you, because she's going through the process, internship, postdoc, etc. And you guys will be there at some point. It may seem like it's far away. It's not far away. It's going to be here before you know it. So, so that's really cool too. So I guess without further ado, our Srishti, I guess everybody knows who you are, right? I don't know. Do you want to say hi too?
For many years, thank you. And thanks so much for seeing me as part of this first lecture. I'm only here to make sure that this is started out from the TC Canvas perspective, but I am a fifth year advanced doctoral student, and as you know, I'm Dr. Lana Verdelli's Global Mental Health Labs coordinator, and I'm onward towards my internship in the fall. So it's nice to see all of my junior colleagues and Anika, who's also from my lab.
Congratulations. That's so exciting.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Adam. Outside of this IT, I can tell you I'm not getting my degree in anything IT.
Neither. Michelle, neither. Right?
Not doing that one.
We're all very specialized, right? Well, congratulations to you, and thanks for all your help with the course stuff. And clearly have a very, very bright future ahead. So super excited to stay in touch and see where this crazy field and world takes you next. And so thank you for being with us to make sure things run smoothly as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
So yeah, I'd love to just briefly introduce Michelle, Dr. Michelle Barton, who is going to be your first semester supervisor. Actually, she'll so Dr. Michelle Barton and Dr. Emily Becker-Weidman, who you're going to meet. Actually, you'll meet Emily sooner than the second semester because she'll be presenting some topics in the first semester. But we kind of have it sort of split up with Michelle leading more of the first semester, Emily leading more of the second semester. But they have some flexibility that they'll figure out what makes the most sense. But they'll be your two supervisors throughout the course, and they'll also be presenting on several topics personally, and we'll be coordinating with me and our didactic speakers and things like that along the way. And then they'll be also continuing supervision with you all after the didactic portion is over, just into the summer a little bit, so you guys can continue to get great supervision on your cases until the end of the practicum. So I'm just really excited to be able to introduce Michelle and Emily, although she's not here right now, and kind of like, I don't know, like share how amazing she is and her expertise and everything with you guys. And I think it's a real treat for y'all because she is just Michelle is just incredible, and she is one of my closest colleagues and friends at CFI and WCF, and she is our training director, and she runs a number of different programs, including, I mentioned before, virtual reality and biofeedback program. Michelle and I have presented together at the World Congress of Cognitive Therapies in Berlin. I mean, Michelle didn't actually come to Berlin, but I presented on behalf of us. And she just has been so instrumental in so many amazing projects and supervision projects at both CFI and WCF. And it's just like a really warm and caring and brilliant soul. So I'm just so happy. Michelle, thank you for doing this. Thank you for being a part of this, this kind of experimental partnership. And you guys are really lucky to have her and as your primary supervisor now. And without further ado, Michelle, I'll let you take it away. I saw Kendra just come on, so we might give her a chance to say hi. But I'll turn it over to you, Michelle, now, so you can kind of do your thing and maybe have Kendra introduce yourself as well. But Michelle, thank you again, and just so happy you're here to help guide these students.
Very happy to be here, very excited to be part of this, and I think it's really, really cool that this is getting integrated into your program. I started at Teachers College, and unfortunately one of the reasons I left was because I was a CBT heavy interest person, and there was not much of that available. So I had a great experience with all the other courses I took, but then I took introduction to, I forget what it was called, something like various psychotherapies, or where they give you a little bit of everything, and the CBT just drew me in. So I had to pursue that. So I have been there when campus was open many, many years ago. Interestingly, my first day of school was supposed to be September 11th, 2001. And now here I am teaching during a pandemic. I'm like, is this my fault or something? I don't know. But anyway, other than that, as Adam said, I'm a clinical health psychologist, and also I do regular psychology without the health portion, but it always winds up getting tied in there somehow. I work with a large population with a wide variety, touching on almost all the different populations each of you have mentioned and have some experience with, which is great. And I wanted to start today with a more general introduction to how to get started. But I guess before I even begin on any of that, Kendra, you want to say hi?
Yeah,
Are you still here? I don't see everybody for some reason.
can you all hear me?
Is Kendra still here?
Yeah, hi. I'm
yes. Okay. She is. Hi.
Actually, you're a little bit you're a little bit faint. Is there any way you can move closer or something? And you could just say a few words, say hi, and like who you are and stuff. And
I'm one of Dr. Weissman's assistants and also an intake coordinator CFI, and I'll just be helping out with some of the administrative things for the course.
Yeah, and I'll just add that Kendra has been so instrumental in making this happen as well. She's been handling a lot of like the onboarding processes and like the administrative processes behind the scenes of like getting like onboarded to TC, and there's a lot of different like technical aspects to that, and the website, and then like different steps of HR. So Kendra, thank you so much for your help with that process, and thanks for being here today. And I know the three coordinators, I know you guys have a lot going on with like obviously folks contacting us and wanting services and stuff. So if you need to jump off or jump on or whatever you want to do is fine, just to give you guys that flexibility. But it's exciting you guys are with us. So thank you, Kendra. Turn it back over to Michelle and let her begin.
And Dr. Michelle, on the top of your screen on Zoom, there is a way to do a speaker view versus a gallery view. So if you click on that and did gallery view, then you'll see everybody in the class at once. Does it say speaker view at all on the right-hand side, on the top of your screen on Zoom?
No.
Okay.
You have an updated version, it might just say view instead of speaker view.
Thanks, Abby.
I have sign in as host, enter key to claim host, chat meeting settings, minimize settings, virtual background, and disconnect audio.
Oh, okay.
But when people talk, I can look out, I can look at them. If someone individually is speaking who I can't see, can everybody see me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So yeah, so if somebody wants to chime in that I cannot see, I will switch my view so I can see you. It's nice to hear you, but I would also like to be able to see. So since there are 6 of us learning today, and Christina, if you want to jump in, feel free to ask questions. Let me know if there's something you want me to talk a little bit more about. But in general, it's going to be an overview, and most of the stuff I'm going to talk about, we will revisit in probably gory detail in one of our lectures. But if there's any questions you have that pop up right now and or would help you understand this framework better because of it, please let me know. So
I actually had a quick question, if that's okay.
Sure, please.
So hi. First of all, I was wondering about the recording. So are all our lectures and questions and whatever going to be recorded every week? Is that the plan?
I believe so. If I did it correctly, I set it up to.
As long as it's okay with all of you guys and our presenter and our guest lecturers, okay. Absolutely. I think it'd be really cool to have them recorded. I do see the recording. It says recording at the top left corner of my screen, at least, and it has a little red dot. So that looks good. It looks good.
I don't see that either, but good. So yeah, it's something technologically. It's hysterical because I do use a lot of technology. As Adam mentioned, I work with virtual reality and biofeedback, which is a lot of wires and connecting things to computers and iPads and people and so on. But then when it comes to this stuff, I'm like,
what is this?
Not sure if I'm here, that's great. So if there's any technological problems, let me know, but we will do our best. And interestingly, the virtual stuff isn't that far off when you're just on a screen versus wearing goggles. So, yeah, for that purpose, I guess it's suiting.
And yes. I'll just add, Daisy, if the concern is around presentation of clinical material, Dr. Adam and Dr. Verdadi already decided that we'll find a way to stop and pause the recording in the course if you're presenting sensitive material that you're not comfortable putting on record. But you'll have to prompt the instructors, if it's Dr. Michelle and Dr. Adam, whoever is the instructor for that lecture, to pause the recording at a time when you're making a presentation that you're not comfortable putting on record.
Yeah, thank you, Shashi. That was exactly
sure.
When we talk about.
Yeah, and both Dr. Adam and Dr. Verdadi decided also, in addition to this caveat, the other one, that if you're presenting a patient, don't mention the full name, we know that, and don't mention any identifying features that you feel that, will directly identify your patient.
Yeah, so that's important, and thank you for bringing that up. We can, when we do, and a lot of clinics do this anyway, as far as having case conferences with a larger group, so you're not sharing identifying information across a number of folks at an institution, right? Doing case presentations with, either initials, or you could even just say, a 6-year-old African-American boy, you can kind of do that in a way that is, you're providing some information, but you're not providing any identifiable information. Like from that, you're not going to be able to tell who it is, right? So, and so I think that's something that we'll have to just be a little bit more careful about, so we can do the recording for training purposes, for posterity, but also be really sensitive to the, obviously in compliance with HIPAA, and be really sensitive to the cases that we're working with. So thank you, Daisy and Srishti, for kind of reminding us to kind of talk about that today, prior to jumping into cases this year. Very helpful.
And it definitely is important also when sometimes writing papers or things that might be shared. When we do our case conferences, and we get there, we can address and figure out a cohesive way to present the information so everybody's on the same page, and gives us enough information for us all to know what we need to know for the case, not to identify the person individually. So I don't know if everyone has a copy of what I sent out, but if not, it's on there, on the website that I think I got on successfully. And I just wanted to start talking about with probably some stuff you have experience with already in terms of how you first get to know a client and where to begin. Understanding the different diagnosis and all these different pieces that come together to build this client presenting in front of us. So I gave you a little bit of a chart there, not too complicated looking, but really impactful in terms of how we can conceptualize our clients and all the people in general, but for this purpose. So where you have these 4 contributing factors, that some of which we can control and some of which we cannot control. Genetics, for example, for the most part, is not something that we can control on our own. I think today this might be a little bit of a different discussion than it was when I originally learned this stuff, but for the most part, let's stick with that. Biology is something that is impacted by your genetics, but it is something that we do have power over, where our lifestyle, our habits, our eating habits, our circumstances and environments do tend to affect our biology in terms of how things tend to turn out for us. And that is, again, one of the few things we have some control over. And then, we do have those environmental factors over which we do have control. Like I can be sitting in this room, or if I want, I can go into the city. I can meet in person if I wanted to meet in person, but that probably wouldn't be the smartest thing right now. But again, these are things that I would have personal control over, as would the other individuals. And then there's environmental things, that a lot of them, that we do not have control over. And this is often a struggle for clients, because instead of focusing on the things we can control and that they can control for themselves, a lot of people tend to fixate on those factors that we cannot control. So it's often important to redirect the conversation back to these things that we can control once we have learned about the person's external circumstances and potential genetic contributions and all of those things that impact their ability to control themselves, their environment, and all of those factors, which create many, many variables throughout the treatment process. So that's where I like to start in terms of usually what we do, especially at CFI, is we have an intake with the parents if we're working with children mainly. We also work with adults, but generally speaking, our goal here is to focus on kids. So we start with a parent intake, and we take a very extensive history to get the information on all those topics that I just mentioned. If there was any medical issues, if there was prior treatment, some biological factors, even going all the way back to birth history. Was it a normal birth? Were there any complications then? And pretty much going from there forward, depending on age. There are some other questions we may or may not throw in there, such as substance use and or having been arrested, again, depending on age. Hopefully if they're 3, this is not something we have to worry about. But when we get up into the teenage years, then that could become something that is an impacting factor. Also family history being, highly impactful in terms of all of those 4 areas that I just mentioned. In terms of figuring out where do we begin with these people, what have they already experienced. I also do like to find out if there were any prior treatments, and if so, were there any parts of those treatments that are helpful and or were not helpful at all, and they absolutely do not want to encounter again because it was just so not helpful or such an unpleasant experience for them, to make sure that they don't have to repeat anything and or relive any unpleasant therapeutic experiences, because that is absolutely not our goal. And then, as I'm sure you're learning, since you've been exposed to all these different types of psychotherapy, we do tend to integrate. So as defined, we are a CBT practice, or evidence-based practice. However, I don't believe there's any cookie cutter treatment for any individual whatsoever. Even when we do have someone, for example, that does have selective mutism, and there is a very clear-cut trajectory to follow in order to help this client, sometimes there's still impinging factors. For example, I remember a case where Christina had a bilingual family, and at home they only spoke Russian, so this made it very difficult in some cases to communicate. And then maybe one day she'll talk about that a little bit more. But anyway, so there's this type of thing that's important for us to know when determining the best course of treatment. And that said, I really do like to integrate whatever's necessary to help the client to the best of our ability. So again, just CET to start with. The general model we follow is my next fancy little picture there, and wait till you see my drawings; those get really fancy. But anyway, for this purposes, I stuck with the photocopies. So we have this triad of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And whether, I don't know if this was something that was taught in school or not, the directions in which this originates still is yet to be determined. They have the Cannon-Barr theory and the James-Lange theories, which are in opposition to one another in terms of which one happens first. In some cases, that's helpful to know. In other cases, it's not really necessary. I worked with a very strict behavioralist doing phobia extinction, which is one of the main uses of the virtual reality with my clients. And he thought very strongly that it really did not matter at all where this originated from or what was associated with it. It's just a matter of dealing with this behavior that's happening now and fixing it. I tend to like to integrate, and that's a kind of quick and dirty way to get a phobia extinguished. However, then I find things pop back up. So yes, I can get you on a plane in 3 weeks if you have a phobia of flying. However, there might be some issues that remain that we want to pay attention to over the long term to maybe revisit and hopefully, I don't want to say cure, but, remove other factors that are impacting the increased or heightened fear that might be occurring in that individual. So having the thoughts, having the feelings and the behaviors, oftentimes people wind up in treatment because of the behavior. So somebody has identified a behavior that's problematic in a class or in a home or in public somewhere. Someone said, this behavior is not so great. We need to do something about it. So that's when they land at our door or doors or Zooms at this time these days on our screen. And we have to work backwards. So often we're working in that backward direction where we know what the behavior is or the identified behavior problem that has been presented to us. And our job is to work backwards and figure out what were the thoughts and feelings that created this behavior in this person. So that's where I think the other modalities tend to come in. A quick example, I'm working with a client who had a fear of swimming, and she lives near a lake, and long story short, she attributed her fear to a phobia of jaws. After much rational discussion and working through the thoughts, it was very clear to her that there were no sharks in that lake, so that was helpful. But it also wound up going back to when she was able to get herself in the water, us figuring out why jaws. What's the threat? You're not, surrounded by sharks at any time, and it turned out, using some psychoanalytic stuff, it was connected to her having an abusive father in childhood. So, all of these modalities, I believe, work very well together to give the person as much or as little insight into their issues as they want. And then there are people who really don't want much insight. They just want to get on that plane or get in that water. And once they get in there, they're good to go and they don't want to come back for more. So, strictly speaking, the CBT protocol is generally a 12-week program where you're able to identify a specific goal and work through to get to the point where that behavior is no longer a problem or has been adapted to become a more functional behavior that serves the person well in those situations, or at least better to begin with. But then, as I said, I like to include a little bit of the psychodynamic, structural family therapy. I love Minuchin and great stuff there. Strategic and the Bowenian stuff, I think, again, kind of speak to a lot of what was going on behind the scenes or what might have led up to why we are having this discussion about this current behavior. So I am not opposed to integrating those, but usually we try to start with something CBT, and other stuff often comes up. So people come for one reason and then they stay for 3 others. And there's a gentleman that I started seeing for fear of flying, and it was one of those cases where he had to, within a month, just get on this plane, and he did. However, I still see him, and as Adam mentioned before, something super interesting about that started this research project where I had been working remotely with clients using virtual reality in order to keep up their ability to engage in that activity. So flying isn't something most of us do very often. And so between flights, it's not uncommon for the work that we did to kind of get undone because we're not really actively reinforcing it. However, we found a way around this. If you use virtual reality, which I can talk much more about when it's my turn to do that, you're able to maintain and continue that comfortable level of activity and allow them to continue to engage in that. Maybe I don't know, as easily as if they flew very, very frequently, but certainly as close as we've been able to find. So there's all of that stuff. Any questions, comments about anything I said so far? No? Okay, well then I will talk more. So in terms of clinical interviewing, there are different styles. Have you all been exposed to the SCID or any other type of formalized evaluation? Yes, you've all seen that already before. Okay, so something along those lines is really what you want to use for
I
the
will
first
say,
interview.
Dr. Barton,
Yes.
we don't use that in our clinic. We don't use the SCID. We have like a type of intake we do that involves a battery of screeners, but we wouldn't do a SCID unless you were like, I think Emotion Regulation Therapy Lab uses it.
Okay.
But yeah, usually we do screeners and then depending on the supervisor, follow up with more. But that's something we can use in our clinic, the SCID, if it's something you prefer as a supervisor.
We don't really use it specifically either. It's just, I think it's a great introduction to what you would be looking for during a session. And I'm sure in our very, very extensive intake, which Christina and Lauren and anybody else around can attest to, there's definitely portions of it covered, but we don't specifically use that. I think our intake is kind of a compilation of different interviews that we've found to be very helpful in identifying and getting directly to the source of the problem or the purpose and or their goals for treatment. Something I used when I did my dissertation also at the PI there in the medical genetics department, we used the child behavioral checklist to, it was really interesting. The work is not still being done, but it was a quite extensive project, the New York Hires project that was going on there for many, many, many years, starting early 70s, maybe even late 60s, and they were using a combination of the child behavioral checklist and other pieces of MMPI and anything they found helpful to evaluate the children of schizophrenic and bipolar parents. And then they were followed. And so by the time it was my turn to come in, they had outcome information on the children of the parents they started the study with. So I was able to compare the child behavioral checklist that was administered in childhood to their outcome information as adults, which was pretty cool. So they, it was just a piece of their evaluation battery, but using little pieces of these types of questionnaires or tools and integrating them into the intake process, I find to be very helpful because a lot of these things have been designed just to get right to what you need to know, and you don't have to beat around the bush too much. There will be people who will force you to do that, but we'll get into that too. So, people aren't answering directly and or might not understand the purpose of some of the questions that they've been being asked, I'm sorry. So, so that, each clinic does have their own, and to become very familiar with it, purposes that using it and making sure that you're getting all the information that you want from it, and then adding things as they become relevant. Something that I thought would be extremely important to start adding to our intake of the parents is, are there guns in the home? And this is not something that, was historically asked as part of the intake process, but I find that to be increasingly important, and we are always happy to integrate those types of important pieces. But having something structured that you can depend on and look at, just to have that information available. Interestingly, also sometimes I'll be meeting with a family for a month or so after having looked at their intake, and then now that I know them, going back and taking a look at that again from a different perspective, where a lot of more information comes together for me, stuff that might not have been important to initiate the treatment, but then becomes important as the treatment gets underway. So structuring the therapy, having that first intake being extensive and giving you as much information as you need, including consent forms for maybe former therapists or teachers that have information that can be helpful. In some cases, as a health psychologist, in almost all cases, I like to talk to the pediatrician and or any other medical professionals involved. If there's a psychiatrist involved, of course, giving medication that will affect my client. We like to be on the same page, or at least know what they're going for, so that we can work in a complementary fashion together. So getting the information from the parents, and then whomever else can provide us with what we need and or can help us get to know the client a little bit better from a different perspective. I like to try to do before meeting with the child for the first time, if possible. Sometimes they don't provide everything we need. Sometimes it's just not possible, but whatever you can do to gather information in advance of, so that you can be most comfortable working with that client as possible. And then, we would move to the first session with the child, which is also basically, another intake, but from their perspective. In some cases, they like the parents to be present, depending on their age and depending on what their issues may be. And one of my favorite questions to ask, which I wrote here on the presenting problem, is, why are you here now? So in most cases, unless of course we're working with the very youngest age, which somebody mentioned, I think Daisy, working with, I wrote notes, but those very, very young children, so, they may not even be fully verbal yet, and they may not even know who you are or why you're there. And discussing that with the parents is actually important and not something I meant to bring up now. However, Christina also did join me when I worked in a children's center with very young children, and our youngest client there was 2. And she had no idea who we were or why we were there. And to this day, I see her mom, and her mom still just says, that's my friend, Michelle. She's now 5. So, they just always knew me as mom's friend that wanted to talk to them. And that was the best way she could explain it to them at the time we began seeing them. So it's been an interesting progression. But again, maybe for another day. So, the question being, what brings you here now? To children that are of age, there's usually something that's been going on for some period of time. They're not coming in the first time that someone has noticed this issue. So generally speaking, it's a problem that exists, and then something has happened to bring it to a head. So, this kid maybe has some behavioral problems, but now he's in 5th grade and he punched somebody in the face. So now that's why this is a problem now. The behavior has probably been an issue ongoingly, but now he's getting in trouble, and now other people are being affected, and so on. So that would be the most helpful, I find, in bringing us to the present to see, what is this about? And when did you think it became a problem, even though, now is when it's being addressed? And that can also give you a lot of insight into the history and progression of the situation, and hopefully how it got to where it is now. And then that being said, the next question I like to ask, and depending on age, if they can see 6 months in advance, is, how would we know that what we're doing is working for you? And this is probably one of the most powerful parts of CBT that I think is really, really impactful, because we look at things in a quantitative fashion. Excuse me. So for example, if somebody comes in with depression, okay, well, you're depressed, and then we'll hopefully treat you, and then you won't be depressed. But along the way, how will we know that? How will we know that we're going in the right direction? So we choose goals that we can measure quantitatively, such as, I'm depressed and I cry 8 times a day. Okay, well, hopefully our goal will be for you to not cry frequently unless there's a specific reason. But initially, we want to work in a fashion that's manageable and set some realistic goals. I particularly like to set the goals early on the lower end, just to start to build self-esteem. So for in this example, I would say, okay, so maybe after 2 weeks, you'll only cry 7 times a day instead of 8 times a day. And that's not, the most exciting news, but you can see and count quantitatively that there has been a change and that the treatment is moving in the right direction. If for some reason after that 2-week intervention, they're still crying 8 times a day or more, we see that we're barking up the wrong tree, and we'll need to reevaluate to see what goals we really need to be focusing on, and or what interventions we need to be putting into this treatment, because what we're doing is going in the wrong direction. So that is my favorite part of CBT, is that you really do need to pick an identifiable quantitative goal that we can assess, and not today, but again at some point when it is my turn to speak more, I'll introduce a thought record that we use that helps to really compartmentalize this and give you a framework to look at and evaluate, because along the way we'll also be evaluating the belief systems and the thoughts and the feelings associated. And then something that's extremely big in CBT is the automatic thoughts, and how those continue to help the problem progress if they're not caught soon enough and or addressed regularly. So that, I believe, let me just make sure I touched on all of these. Oh no, the last piece of this is that also very important to give them those types of tools to use, like that thought record. But in general, we're only meeting with our clients for 45 minutes a week. In some cases, it's less or more if parents are getting involved in a session. If somebody's late, we skip a week, or whatever. Whatever will be, especially these days. We never know what's coming up on a day-to-day basis. But anyway, so what I'd like to do there is to encourage clients to do work outside of session. So to use the skills that we're building and to try to keep these things in mind in terms of those quantitative goals that we're looking at in their day-to-day, and continue to evaluate situations that occur while we're not in session, because again, it's only such a short week. And in addition, there's only so much you can do in 45 minutes that you can address. But that and just kind of jump on something Adam said earlier, this is where most times parents can be very integral in partnering with us to help facilitate the usage of the tools that we give. And then you'll also find in some cases they're not so helpful in facilitating, and in many cases quite the opposite. So I am a mother, and you will hear probably, I'm not trying to say, I will blame parents ongoingly, including myself, particularly, if they're working against us. And in that case, we're not here to actually physically scold the parents, but overcome and overcompensate by giving the child stronger tools to help themselves navigate a little bit better, since we know we're not getting as much reinforcement or support from parents that we would like. And in addition, maybe trying to find them some mentors and or teachers or coaches or someone else that might want to partner with us and take an interest in this child's progress or behavior. If maybe it was a coach who noticed a change in behavior of one of their team members, and now they would really like this child not to be kicked off the team because they're a fantastic football player. However, if the behavior problems continue, they will not be allowed to continue playing football. So that type of thing. In some cases, when the parents don't step in, we find somebody else that can. And again, if not, I always strongly advocate for the child to accept their parents for who they are and work past their limitations by building up some stronger tools and skills for themselves to use on a regular basis. I probably touched on some of this, but I do want to go on to the case conceptualization piece. Any questions about that stuff with the intake and
I had a
interview.
question, actually. So I was just curious about the setting up like a time of how to measure if you could see progress or when the goals will be achieved. And what like has concerned me about that is like the individual and contextual differences that make it hard to predict how long it'll take somebody to actually be able to achieve whatever the goal is. And I was just wondering, like in your clinical experience, how clients react to like, let's say 6 months and you thought that like they would reach a certain milestone and they're not there, and how that affects the treatment.
And thank you for asking it, because absolutely it does. So strictly speaking, if you have one clear-cut identifiable issue, so for example, I have a fear of flying, I need to get on this plane. And this is all we talk about, this is all we work on. We do not talk about any of the other stuff that I mentioned about going, back to history or how did it get like this. And with that, if attendance is regular and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing and goals are clear, you can very, not easily, but you can very well follow the model in a timely fashion. Unfortunately, real life happens, and there are sometimes when people will miss a session or maybe not do the work that week, or have some, which comes from the psychoanalytic, the resistance that builds and builds across modalities. So that doesn't even touch on the idea that there might be comorbid issues happening. So, there might be something else going on, which will then, again, dilute that specific treatment. Not that it isn't helpful. I generally find a way to kind of integrate all that stuff to work together. So then you have to consider, well, I did actually have this discussion with the woman that I mentioned earlier who had the fear of swimming, where we discussed this very strict 12-week protocol, how it was going to be done. She wanted to use an actual lake, so weather and timing were a factor. And she was able to do a lot of the work on her own and progress much more quickly than anticipated, where at first I was almost offended, like, we're not meeting this week, oh my goodness, we have one more week left till you can go swimming. And then in that week off, she actually used everything we'd been doing and overcame and got herself in there. So strictly speaking about that, and even we did have a little time to get into the psychoanalytics of her relationship with her dad, which I think helped propel her. She's actually a psychoanalyst herself, so she had a little bit of a background, so it was easier for her to access a lot of that stuff than it would be probably the common client. But we did discuss that if you want to work on anything other than this specific phobia, it may take longer. And so she was very active in doing all that work on her own, and therefore it will not take longer. And I have many clients that come for one phobia, and along the way we pick up on a lot of other stuff that might be more important to address initially before you need to go and do that thing you think you need to do. So, it isn't, I'm signing you up for 12 weeks and then I'm kicking you out the door, but we want to assess the issues and, prioritize them and make sure that what needs to be addressed up front is what gets addressed up front. And then, of course, that we can integrate the client's goals into that process. But I do ongoingly update clients and parents as to where we are, what we're doing, and how much of it and how long it will take, because often people are like, oh, what do you mean this is taking forever? This is much longer than I thought. In some cases, I will meet with clients up to 4 times before we can fully build rapport and actually get moving on the goals, to get to know them, depending on the child, depending on the age of the child. Some kids aren't so forthcoming, and you have to get into the play therapy with them and wherever works to get them expressing themselves. I am at a great disadvantage working virtually because I had like a slime lab set up in my office, which gets everybody talking. They're at first like 15-year-old boys are like, I don't want to play with slime. 10 minutes later, like, can we make this one? What about if we add this? So, you know, it's very funny to see. So that was something that I used as a universal tool across ages. And even those who said they would never want to play or touch it wound up taking some home or making one to keep for me to give to someone else or something along those lines. So that there's usually ways to do it. So what I've been doing more now with the virtual is I'll have them do an activity they like to do. So for example, I have a child who enjoys making stickers. So every session he's making different stickers, but he's explaining to me what kind of sticker he's drawing, what does it mean to him, who he's going to give it to and why, and all this stuff where he thinks he's just making stickers, but I'm really getting to know him really well. And then once we're able to do that, we then start officially with that protocol of following the goals and measuring their outcomes. And again, it's not always a linear process. Sometimes they go on vacation. Sometimes, you know, again, something else comes up in the family, or we miss a couple sessions and we have to take a few steps back and revisit some stuff to get back to the point where we were before that interlude.
Michelle, can I jump in and give like just like another perspective on how to address like the time frame and, you know, all that kind of stuff? Because that was a great question. And I'm sure we all do it like a little bit differently, but sort of have some of the same kind of stuff in mind. So for me, like for a general kind of case that might come through, I typically talk about, you know, in general, I like to educate parents during the first parent intake about what cognitive behavioral therapy is, because you know, there's a ton of therapists out there practicing all kinds of different modalities, and some people just literally talk, don't have much structure or even training behind what they're doing. They're just talking to the person. It's like, oh, really? That's interesting. You know, so we really want to kind of emphasize the scientific approach of CBT in that first session. And I like to educate parents about what we're going to be doing, the connection between thoughts, feelings, and behavior, which Michelle will go more into, and how we're going to be teaching skills that address all three parts of the kind of emotion triangle, which we'll again talk about later. But and then I kind of like to explain, like, you know, so cognitive behavioral therapy is one evidence-based treatment based on cognitive and behavioral science. It's typically shorter term, but for me, that can mean a lot of different things. And it really depends on the case and the complexity of the case and the components that need to be addressed. So for a lot, one of my areas of expertise is parent training. So I spend a lot of time often working with parents, and I'm often working in like a dual prong kind of approach where I'm working with the parents on parent training, and either myself or a colleague is working with the child on, you know, some CBT skills for the kid. And so depending upon what's needed from both those pieces, or a family component or whatever, treatments can span a really wide variety of time frames. And so what I will just, sometimes parents will still say, well, give me an estimate, tell me something, right? And again, for a more general case, it's not like a very specific phobia or a very, like, we can talk about what those might be. But I will typically say, and I don't know, this is not based on, this is just kind of come up with this over the years. Like I will say, like, yeah, you know, it's typically shorter term. I think you should see some really good progress in like the 4 to 6 month range. However, I have certainly had cases that were much, much shorter. And I've certainly had cases that were that were over a year, depending upon what we're addressing. And Michelle spoke to some of this too, with bringing in some other types of, whether you need to add some insight-oriented work, especially with an adult, or you know, just other types of therapeutic, artful touches along the way. But you know, if I'm doing a parent training a course of parent training, and then I'm also working with the kid, and then, you know, these things can and they're more complex, and there's a lot of different issues that we're trying to dive through, not only some anxiety and some trauma, but also some OCD, and we got to go down that road. So it really depends, but I like to give a ballpark of, like, I say, like, you know, 4 to 6 months we should see a good deal of progress, and we're going to be monitoring progress along the way. And during the intake, we do a couple of things, including snapshot rating scales, and I also collect top problems, so their own goals for therapy in their own words, with ratings from 0 to 10 for how severe they are at the beginning. And I come back and you know, and a lot of us do this, we come back and we try to, like, or sometimes if it's like OCD, we'll give an OCD scale, ADHD, we'll give an ADHD, we'll supplement with lots of other scales if needed. but we can come back and take those once a month, every few weeks, and we can actually track progress and use ongoing assessment, evidence-based assessment, to guide additional treatment planning as symptoms evolve and change and hopefully get better. So we can actually keep updating the family on that metric. But I say 4 to 6 months certainly could be shorter, certainly could be longer. But I typically think of CBT as a matter of months versus more traditional psychotherapy spanning a matter of years. And that's kind of how I will explain it to families in a nutshell. And then they're usually, okay, that makes sense to me. Now, for more specific protocols, if it's a specific phobia, which Michelle has tons of experience with, or for me, like if I know I'm doing a course of behavioral parent training, or PCIT, parent-child interaction therapy, adapted treatment, that kind of thing. For behavioral parent training, I know that I can pretty much teach all the skills necessary in 12 to 16 sessions. So I'll say, I can teach you everything I know about the evidence-based for helping best support your kids for these types of issues in 12 to 16 sessions. However, what typically happens is we'll talk about all kinds of stuff in those sessions as well, and things will come up, and you'll ask, I want to be here for you the way that you need me to. I'm basically in this role of behavioral consultant to you, and so what if we just go if it's very didactic, we go step by step, then 12 to 16 sessions, I can do that for you. Or, sometimes it will take longer depending on what your needs are and what you'd like to do. Some people like to kind of have me there for a little bit longer. But the goal isn't to rely on me. It's for you guys to be equipped, empowered, and become, your kids to become the experts in the skills they're learning. You guys certainly to feel empowered and become the experts in whatever it is that you need to tweak. And I'll be there in the background if you want to give me a call for a booster session. But this is meant to be very short term and skills based and solutions focused. And another treatment that I do a lot is habit reversal therapy for tic disorders, trichotillomania, hair pulling, dermatillomania, skin picking, any type of habit. I call them habit disorders. It's not a real thing, but we all have habits, and habit reversal therapy is a really great short-term, really easy, very, very, very behavioral treatment for pretty much any habit you can imagine. We all have them, so it can work for anything. I've been hired for everything from thumb sucking to young girls pushing or masturbating in the classroom, rubbing up against the chair, and the teacher's like, oh my God, no, this is not a big deal. This is very common, and I'm going to go off label and use habit reversal therapy for tic disorders for this little girl pushing in the classroom. And there's creative ways to do these things, and that's very short term. So I can teach you all the things you need to know about how to treat these, or how to help. I don't like to use the word treat too much. How to help reduce some of these behaviors that may be problematic in probably 10 to 12 to 16 sessions, that kind of thing, right? If I just go through it with you, it's a really easy protocol. But again, there might be some related anxiety. There might be some related other issues that we want to kind of do some coping skills around, or parent support, or teacher support. So I think that the question that you asked is actually pretty loaded, as you can tell, half an hour later from Michelle's responses. But there's no like right or wrong answer. But like I like to give a general framework, very like kind of cautionary, like here's what I'll tell you. However, and really just give myself a million outs for whatever might transpire, because that's just the reality of the situation. Now, if you have, again, a specific protocol, like, oh, here's what I'm going to do each session, you can say, yeah, this usually takes this amount of time. However, blah, blah, blah. But in general, case comes through, they have anxiety, right? Like it's like a million different things. I try to just give a ballpark and explain that this is a shorter term treatment than traditional psychotherapies, and I usually like to use the term matter of months versus matter of years. So that's my little contribution on that, and I'll go back on mute. But I don't know if Michelle, that was helpful, but I wanted to just
No,
like,
absolutely. I often say to people, my goal is not to, I don't want you to need me. I would like to give you skills and tools that you can take away. If you would like to continue to see me once you have those tools and skills, by all means, I'm happy to continue seeing you, but my goal is not to keep you. I don't want you to need me for the rest of your life. I don't want, we will not still be having the same conversation 15 years from now. So
I don't want to belabor the point at all, but I think from a trainee perspective too, the idea might be, like, I don't have 10 years treating social anxiety experience, so maybe I don't fully know the like it in the tweak thing that the manual says, because I'm not going to do it as like effectively maybe as the manual says to go through these steps. So let's say you set a deadline of in 4 weeks you should see this behavioral goal, and the kid hasn't met that goal. Like, that's not a treatment failure. And that's not going to crush the kid, and that's not going to crush your own experience too, because it's just an opportunity to talk about, like, well, what did we do that actually took up that time that maybe we didn't make the progress we expected? Or what are we doing that maybe is not as effective, and how can I change what I'm doing? How can we change what you're doing so that maybe we set up a different goal that's more achievable? Or maybe we reach the next goal knowing now what we already learned. So the whole like setting up a goal and then not reaching it it's like a part of therapy, just like it's a part of all of our lives when we set up a goal for ourselves. So it totally does not have to feel like an end all be all of the manual said 6 weeks and I'm 8 weeks deep and I don't feel like I'm there.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Christina. I think the key there is like no pressure. So the question itself, like, yeah, just like the answer is like there's no pressure. Like, yeah, we're doing more skills based, more like, a little bit more structured, definitely more structured in a lot of ways. And some treatments are super structured and some are not as structured, and you're using the principles more flexibly, right? But there's no pressure. We're not doing a randomized control trial here, right? We're doing real world practice. And you just want to learn and implement the stuff the way that makes the most sense. And right now you will use some tools and some manuals, and then later you will probably maybe still use some, but you'll also just start to think more flexibly because you have all the thoughts and concepts in your head, and you're going to become a really good clinician. The best CBT clinicians are not like super regimented. They're actually like they know all the evidence-based approaches that are out there, and they just like kind of pull them out when they're needed. And it just kind of makes sense. I always say my job is a combination of art and science. And I really believe that because I'm a very science-based clinician, and yet I'm also like an artist. The way that I feel like, Michelle, you probably are very similar like, in the way you think about this, because you're very creative. But like that's how I think about it. So it's kind of a beautiful thing if you think about it that way.
Yes, I tend to sound throughout the session like I might kind of be all over the place, but then at the end, I usually use the term, and now we'll wrap this up all together in a nice bow and explain why all these pieces fit together and why they're important. And even here, when I was making this outline, I was struggling between visualization before the idea of the therapeutic agreement, and the reason I decided to do that was for that reason, is that it usually takes a little bit of time to filter through what they've told you and what it is that you determine by getting to know this family, child, person, by having the opportunity to go through their intake materials and integrate all these different pieces so that you as the clinician can decide the best approach and give a more realistic and still not signed in stone or carved in stone, but of idea of then where do we go with this therapeutic agreement. I think fee in your clinic's case is something that's handled by the clinic, but when you go on to your own and left to your own devices, that's something that you want to set straight with the clients and establish so that they know what to prepare for, know what to expect, and the length and frequency depending on that can be mutually agreed upon if they understand all these factors. Oftentimes I'll meet with a kid once and a parent is like, okay, so what's the goal? What's the treatment plan? Where's the behavioral outline? And I'm like, don't know them well enough yet to do that, but we're going to meet a few more times and then I'm going to get all that information. And usually about 4 weeks in, which then lends to Adam's early side of the spectrum there, where it would be about a month of getting to know them and then about 3 months of using those 12 weeks for the intervention. And then again, as what else comes up? What else did they not tell you? What did the teacher tell you that they forgot to mention? And so on. So, all those factors can be integrated, and nothing is carved in stone, but using, everything you have to give them the best treatment, which I also like to say that there's no cookie cutter treatment. If I didn't already say it, I might say it like 5 more times, because there just isn't. And I, have to share that with families, and their intentions sometimes change. I don't want it for too long, but I have a family that I'm seeing that came for family therapy. They wanted me to meet with all 4 of them. And then over the course of the first month, it became very clear that that's not what was going to be the most helpful. And now I'm just doing individual with each child. And then eventually I will wrap them in my nice little bow and bring them all together to the family therapy when they're all ready. But they were all in so many different places that it would have been highly unlikely for that to be a successful situation. And they also wanted to be time limited. But anyway, so I can go on and on about all the cases, but both of these things are extremely important for you to conceptualize the case on your own, integrating all of these different factors and realistically identifying what you can do with and for the child and or family, and equipping them with as many tools as possible to continue utilizing these structures or tools throughout the rest of their life. And that's really what we want to give them. One of the things I train most of my clients in, and I will also speak about more again with the biofeedback, is a relaxation breathing. I don't know anyone that can't benefit from that. And that's something that they will always be able to use if they were trained well and will remember to use it, because it works only when you remember to use it. But anyway, so then I'll have a whole spiel about that when I get into the biofeedback. But so conceptualizing the case to what you think to be the most important things, integrating what they are want to focus on and what they think are the most important things, and coming up with the best course of treatment that you can, discussing it, explaining this may take this long, this may take longer, and so on, and integrating all that stuff that Adam and I just said. And then, early in the assessment, obviously the other piece that's extremely important, which I think we do have a full didactic on, if I'm not mistaken, is the suicidal patient and the risk and assessment, which, if anything is mentioned, any ideation, any previous attempts, family history, anything, this is something that we just want to make sure we have covered and documented. And, along the lines of having, as Adam was saying, these things to go back to a month later. Did this change? Has this gotten better? Has this gotten worse? What's going on here? And that's, really important, obvious. I shouldn't say obviously. I cannot stress enough the importance of, being on top of that and making sure that you have an ongoing discussion regarding that matter if it is an issue. And then, being able to identify the different phases of therapy and patterns that might emerge during those times. So, for example, something that I come across, as I mentioned earlier, is the resistance. So usually after about the 4th session, or 4th treatment session, I should say, because there's a couple of sessions where we're getting to know each other, there's some resistance that comes up. People either get busy or give some pushback, or all of a sudden can't make it for a couple of weeks, and other things that aren't so overt can interfere with the therapeutic process, which also, again, can elongate the process, because now we have to stop what we were here to focus on and go back to discuss the resistance and what we need to overcome that. So, the course of the treatment isn't always exactly as designed, because these are humans and these things pop up. So as formal and quantifiable and sustainable as the 12-week protocol of CBT is, we are still treating humans, and they tend to come up with some stuff along the way that will either show they're not interested in coming back because this is just too scary for them, Oftentimes, if you're sensitive enough, this is an opportunity where we can go off script and use different models, as I think Anne was mentioning, these different types of well-founded evidence-based models that help us meet the clients where they are. So one of my most favorite ones that I will talk about probably ad nauseum is using the trans theoretical model. It's the Prochaska-Di Clemente trans theoretical model, stages of change. I don't know if you've been introduced to this yet, but if so, yes, I'm getting some nods. So basically, this is a process that discusses change as a 5-year-long endeavor, and nobody wants to hear that. So I don't usually lead with that. But once they're in the thick of it, and going through that process, that becomes evident. So, you have clients that come in ready to do therapy. They're very insightful. They're very aware. They know what they're doing to cause their issues, and they're ready to go. And then you have other clients that come in at the very other end of the spectrum. And this model, the trans-theoretical model was developed for smoking cessation, but has now been generalized to all kinds of areas, including executive functioning and all pretty much anything you want to apply it to, I believe. So starting with people who are in a pre-contemplation stage where they don't even believe that this would apply to them, like, oh, there's people that stop smoking, interesting, would be the first stage. Then the contemplation stage where they start to identify that, oh wait, I'm a person who smokes, that's interesting, maybe I could stop smoking. And then you have your planning phase where you would start to think about what would be all those things you need to stop smoking. So I need that patch, I need the Chantix, there's gum, I need make new friends because the people I hang out with at lunchtime all smoke cigarettes, and so on. So it might go deeper than anyone could have even imagined, or it could be a very superficial thing. So that again would be, where are they in this process? And then once you get them past that point where they do collect all the things that would be necessary to set a date and start the stopping, that's the day they stop. And now we have enter the maintenance phase, which is the hardest phase because you have to keep not smoking to have stopped smoking. So you don't just stop smoking once, but you have to continue to not smoke and maintain that progress, which can bring new stuff up along the way. And then my favorite of all of those stages is the relapse, because in most cases, someone will have a cigarette again. And now, you can look at like an AA type model or a 12-step model where now you're back to square one, you're starting back at day one, and you have to go all the way back to the beginning. Whereas this model is a little bit more forgiving in that we will still acknowledge all that other work you did, but it looks like we might have missed something here. So maybe when there's additional stress, like a pandemic, perhaps, then you might start smoking again. And that's not something you could have foreseen to provide yourself with support for. But now that we are aware, we can go back and add more support into that planning and action phase to keep you where you want to be, and continue to maintain your progress. And that's one of my favorite things about that model, is really that incorporation of the relapse and the non-punitive measures with which it's integrated into the treatment, as opposed to you're bad, you did everything wrong, now you have to start all over again. So alleviates the judgment, and a lot of credit is still given to the person for being an active participant, because at that point they could throw their hands in the air and say, forget it, I'm just going to be a smoker again. So, that's something that can take a lot of support. Another thing I wanted to discuss along these lines is that the pendulum swings. So in most cases, we have behaviors that can create unbalance. And as humans, our goal to not be anxious and function regularly is to be balanced as often as possible. So I like to identify for and with people, how far do they swing? So to just stick with the smoking example, you have people who have 1 cigarette a day, and then you have people who have 4 packs of cigarettes a day. So, probably getting someone that's smoking only 1 cigarette a day to stop would be, in theory, a little more simple than getting someone that smokes 5 packs of cigarettes a day to stop. So, you have a pendulum that swings this much for the person who smokes 1 cigarette, but then for the person who smokes 10, it swings this way and that way. And getting that into a balance is a little bit more challenging. So depending on their understanding of this pendulum and awareness and insight into their behaviors that are in the pendulum, can lend a lot to the treatment and really give insight into what it is that we're recovering from, or how much work do we have to do to get to that more balanced central place. And I look like I'm running out of time, so I'm going to have to speed through some stuff here. And so a lot of it I will talk about again. But then, another thing that interferes with the ability to think rationally and utilize the treatment is emotionality. I believe there's a disproportionate inverse relationship, I should say, between logic and emotion. So if someone is extraordinarily emotional, it is highly unlikely you're going to have a rational, logical discussion with them. And the goal will be to, bring down that level of emotionality, and that, again, may allow the treatment to take more time because we're not directly going head on to the problem. We have to get, we have to calm down and think clearly before we can accept these new premises or tools that we have to use well. And that's where my breathing and the relaxation training and biofeedback comes in. Is, I kind of put a halt to whatever we're doing here and redirect in that. I want to give you some tools to relax and calm down so that when you do face these very difficult topics that we're going to continue to bring up, you do have some tools to calm yourself down. So I don't want to poke you if you're in a vulnerable state. We want to be able to bring you to a less vulnerable state so that you can process those things in a logical and meaningful way. We also use the emotions, but again, depending on the heightened level, a quick and easy example I can use is I measure galvanic skin response for anxiety when I'm doing a phobia exposure. So if I have a client that's doing relaxation breathing, and as their galvanic skin response is increasing, so if we're starting at a 4 and they're getting exposure, and now we're at an 8 and they are still exposing, I want to stop the exposure and calm them down a little, do some relaxation breathing if they haven't been on their own. So now they know when they start to have those feelings, that's what they need to do on their own. And then they can go back and revisit the exposure again. So lots of nuances that I'll get into with both of those things. However, if you're sensing that a client is not being receptive and or their level of anxiety or distraction is interfering with their ability to focus on the work you're doing, this is, again, something like we're not on a carved timetable. We can stop and say, all right, we need to learn how to relax a little bit before we introduce anything more that's anxiety provoking. I do that the kind way. As I mentioned, there's other clinicians that will do exposures without giving people these skills and just very quick and dirty expose them to what makes them the most anxious and then teach them how to deal with it. I tend to err on a more gentle approach. As Adam said, I was nice, so I have to act like I'm nice now. But, I like to give them some tools to allow them to feel as comfortable as possible while making them feel as uncomfortable as possible. So, again, I'll speak much more about that when it's my turn. And then the other idea is icebreakers. Usually with kids more likely than adults, this is where you want to pull out a game. You want to pull out the slime. You want to, play a game making silly faces or whatever you can do depending on your modality over Zoom or in person or the tools available to you. And a lot of our therapists, I think, particularly Lexi, who will be coming up and talking about work with kids the most and their anxiety, has so many tricks up her sleeve. And we have a lot of talented clinicians that just come up with such amazing ideas and ways to get these kids to come around and open up and break that ice that's preventing them from benefiting from the treatment. Then the last couple of points is process notes is something that I hated when I was first forced to do, but wound up being so helpful. Maybe Christina can talk about this, or anyone else who might have had to do them before. But you want to just cut out any even pronouns or anything that's unnecessary in just making a concise summary of what happened, so that someone reading this as a supervisor, or hopefully no one else, I don't know who else it would be shared with, a teacher, who else, that they know what happened in your session, they know what was presented, they know what interventions that you use, and you can use that information to help you guide yourself through either supervision and or the next session with that client by reviewing that information and having it fresh in your mind for the next meeting. So that's something that I will highly recommend. I don't think we put it as required in the course catalog, but early on I found it to be extremely helpful in my building of my therapeutic techniques and understandings of the client's needs. And then the last couple of pieces, so the last piece, yes, this is the last piece before I say questions. All right, so that wasn't so horrible. Just the idea of working with the different types of supervision. So as you're aware, there is group supervision. In some cases, someone may require individual supervision in some programs, and Christina can talk more about that if she wishes at some point. You're required to have both and or a certain amount of either, so making sure you're comfortable with those modalities. And then a third type of supervision that I also found so helpful in my training was peer supervision. So to work with, and I think Christina has already been happy to volunteer to do any of this type of work with people, is to answer any questions you have privately that might be more directed at someone who's closer to the experience than I am, and or just listening to your peers' cases and things that go on that might say, oh, that sounds like one of my clients, maybe I'll try that, as opposed to having to individually speak about each client and their issues, because they are individuals, but there do tend to be overlap in some of these disorders and diagnoses that we can apply across situations to those bearing that diagnosis. And then I think I said all the things: peer supervision, group supervision, individual supervision, and then yes, questions, comments, concerns. Now, later.
I had a question, and just to note, Daisy did have to leave because I think the class cycle lands at 12:40, so she had another meeting. But I did have a question about the logistics of the course. I think you mentioned that there's a different way of doing an intake process with you guys than we typically have, and please forgive me if I'm telling you things you already know or have the answer to. We're used to getting our referrals from the Dean Hope Center and completing an intake report within a month of our first session, having it signed with our supervisor and turning it in that way. Are we getting referrals still from the Dean Hope Center? Are we getting it from the foundation? Are we using our Dean Hope Center template for the intake reports, or is there a different process that we have with you guys? And then, for example, with this semester, you, Dr. Barton, be the person who would be co-signing those reports, and would it switch next semester with the other, primary didactic instructor? Sorry, that was a lot of logistical questions, but
yeah,
it's all very new for me.
I can answer some of them, or maybe Adam, if he's still
here. It's helpful for me to take that question.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Yeah. So as far as I understand, that all the procedures will be the same as they typically are. So everything will run through the clinic still. And if we have any additions or things we want to add along the way, then we'll let you guys know. I would love. I don't know if this is actually going to happen, but we obviously have some research initiatives through WCF that we're working on, and we're going to be collecting some awesome effectiveness data about real world practice and things like that. We have research committee meetings coming up. If there's any way to integrate that with this partnership, I will let you guys know, because I would love to do it. And if that were the case, there may be some additional measures we add or things like that. But that's something we still need to discuss back channel and see if we could even push that through in time. But I think it would be so cool if we could. So for now, let's just kind of proceed as normal, and you guys can do your typical procedures. And and yes, I believe Michelle and Emily would be, as your supervisors, would be co-signing any notes or reports or things like that. But we'll keep you posted on if there's anything special that we are able to add.
Thank you so much.
I was just taking a look at the syllabus, and I just wanted to clarify a few things. I see we have a midterm, which is in the form of a paper. Is that correct? That's that CBT case formulation. That's the midterm.
Yeah, and we have some flexibility on some of those assignments as well. Some kind of initial thoughts from Michelle, Emily, and I. And I think that we'll continue to discuss the content of that over the next few weeks.
Okay.
So there may be some changes, but I think Emily might have come up with that idea about how to do a kind of like a case presentation type thing as well. So we'll keep, since we just you guys know we kind of had to do this very quickly. So we'll keep talking about that and maybe get back to you guys with some more information about once we've hammered out the details and have definite evaluation processes for midterms and for an end of the year. We'll just kind of present that to you guys. You guys have all the information that you need. So
okay. I see, I see case conference written on the syllabus. By that, you mean just informal presentation of cases as we do every week, or does that mean formalized presentations every week by one of us?
So that, I believe an idea for a midterm would be for that to be people presenting a case specifically and being kind of evaluated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But again, the details still need to be hammered out for those evaluation processes. So I would say don't worry about anything right now, except for you just do you're gonna learn how to do case, talk about cases and think about case conceptualization. And so that's what you should be focused on absorbing right now. And then we're gonna figure out the best way to evaluate that.
Okay.
But it's grad school, so just know that the most important thing is just to soak everything you can up and not worry as much about the evaluative pieces. You guys wouldn't be here if you weren't really smart and awesome and motivated. So, but we will communicate to you guys the details of those things. So.
And if I may, request as far as content, some information on atypical versus typical developing children, because we do have a lot of education in child psychopathology. I think we have a lot of that background, but in the Ph.D. program, we haven't done a lot on that, developmental piece. So if appropriate, if speakers can tuck in what would set this apart from normal latency age child or whatever, I think that would be useful, at least from what I know of my own experience in the master's and doc program. That would be really useful.
That's great feedback. And also, because there's going to be so many different speakers and so many different topics, that can be a themed question that you can bring up as appropriate, for different topics. When, Dr. Bob Leahy comes and presents on CBT for worry, and he's I'll just give you a little primer of some of the exciting things to come. So there's two forefathers of CBT. For the people need to jump off. I know we're over time, but Beck and Ellis. And one thing I wanted to do was try to connect you guys to the founders of CBT as much as possible in a very unique way. So we actually have Beck's pretty much one of his top students, Dr. Bob Leahy, presenting. And he's one of the most famous cognitive therapists in the world. And he'll be presenting on CBT for worry. And then we also have Albert Ellis passed away, but his wife, who has co-authored and is a speaker and goes around teaching REBT, Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy, which was one of the precursors to CBT. So those two folks were having their closest colleagues be teachers for you guys, teaching the very basics from as close to the horse's mouth as we can get. So you're going to get both Albert Ellis and Aaron Beck here in this class. And so when Bob Leahy presents, for example, on CBT for worry, it would be very appropriate to ask him a question around, well, so we all have worry, right? So like when would you set that apart from like somebody who is having excessive worry and would need like a CBT, protocol to help them navigate these challenges with the pandemic or with blah blah blah, right? So or anyone who's presenting on a topic, you could say, well, we all, any child or any adult could have that issue. What would set this clinical need apart from just like the thing that I experienced last night when I was trying to fall asleep, right? So I think it's very appropriate to ask those questions throughout. And really good clinical psychologist should be able to speak to differences between clinical level needs and more typically developing issues that we all struggle with or our kids struggle with. So please feel free to speak up and ask that question along the way.
Awesome. Thank you.
You just made me think of a client that I'm currently seeing. So yes, I have, a client that's on the spectrum, and we are actually discussing their worries. So that very on point, and it will come up. So throughout the case discussions or any of the topics, we can definitely address that piece of it because it is very important and rising, and a lot of people can't differentiate. Or will treat those clients very differently when they have many of the same issues, but even though they present atypically. So yes.
That's a great question. And actually, just on a side note, like we all have anxiety. we all have, the things that we treat in our patients, like we can often relate to some aspects of them, whether it's perfectionism or whatever it is. And so to be honest with you, CBT is so skills based that we all can benefit from it. I'm not saying everyone needs to go into a private practice and pay $400 an hour. I talked about that issue earlier, but to get help. But we all, certainly as I went through the motions of school and education and trying to become, a leader in this field, I use this stuff for myself all the time. And I may not always do it very well, but but no, really, like it's a very practical approach to things, and you can definitely think and relearn metacognition, thinking about your thinking, and this applies to all of us. Like, okay, I'm having a bad day, I'm having a negative thought, I'm not in the mood to get out of bed today. Like whatever it is, like we all go through this stuff. I'm up at night thinking about all the things I have to do tomorrow. So this is stuff that we can all be taking advantage of and making us better clinicians and making us better humans as well. So.
Can I ask you a quick logistical question?
Sure.
So I think Dr. Rosa has mentioned that she'll be like handling our patient assignments. I was just wondering sort of like a timeline from your perspective for planning purposes of when she would have kind of like a go-ahead from you guys to start that process.
I believe last I heard in our conversation recently that they were thinking about doing case assignments like mid-October, maybe, to give you guys some weeks of just getting acclimated to some foundational readings and foundational classwork. So I think mid-October, maybe even the third week in October, just to give you guys that time. And then we would start diving more into kind of case conferencey type stuff while also doing additional didactics along the way.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Sure.
Okay.
Any other thoughts or questions? I know folks need to jump off, but we're happy to stay a few extra minutes if needed. So.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So Michelle, you'll see them next week, right? I won't be on that call.
Someone else. But yes, I will be there with whoever else is on the syllabus for that day.
Yeah, I'm having fun either. But yeah, so we'll start the didactics portion next week, and get ready for some great speakers on all different topics, and I hope it's exciting and engaging. And feel free to send us feedback along the way, because we want to make this is our first time, so we want to make this really a positive experience for you guys. So if you have suggestions, we can just keep making it better and better in the future as well. So thanks for going on this journey with us, and look forward to seeing you all soon. And stay safe.
Guys.
Okay, bye.
Bye.